What's up, 110 fam? It's Tag here on staff with Athletes in Action and 110 here at UT. Hope you guys are doing well. Tonight, I want to dive into a question. And here's the question we're going to look at. It's how do I deal with pain, suffering, and injustice in life? How do we deal with pain, suffering, and injustice in life? Life gives us trials, pain, struggle, suffering. They're all guaranteed for us. We can't make all that stuff go away necessarily. But what we can do is make a choice. We can choose to trust God, press into the darkness, and try to make a difference. And so we're going to look at a guy tonight by the name of Joseph. And so Joseph was a 17-year-old guy, and he's in the Old Testament. So if you're new to the Bible, here's the deal. There's 16 books in this Bible. So you got, 66 different books, not 16. There's 66 different books in this Bible. And in the Old Testament, the very first book is called Genesis. And Genesis means beginnings, and that's the book where we find Joseph. So in Genesis, we have 50 chapters of men and women wrestling with God as they're trying to figure out how to do life with God. And so we get Adam and Eve, the beginning, first man and woman. And then they rebel against God and their selfishness, try to do things their own way without God, and so things get sideways really quick. And then they start to have kids, their family grows, and things just kind of continue to get worse and worse as we have more folks continuing to kind of rebel against God and do things their own way. So Adam and Eve's family grows, and eventually in God's mercy, he sends a flood. And this guy named Noah and his family get on an ark, get on a boat that God leads them to build. They're rescued, and God's plan is to start over again. And so we go from Noah through several generations, and then we show up with a guy named Abram. And Abraham has a grandson named Jacob. So here's the deal. Jacob's name means deceiver. It means literally deceiver. So how would you like to have a name like that your name means deceiver? So he was a deceiver and a schemer, but one day God changed his name, changed his life. And so Jacob wrestled with an angel, and this angel was God in angelic form. And so as God meets him at this river one day, they wrestle. And Jacob's hip is popped out. He has a limp the rest of his life. And God in that moment changes his name to Israel. And so Israel means struggle, to wrestle with God. And that's the series that we've been talking about. And so Israel means to wrestle, struggle with God. And that's what Israel did the rest of his life. And so Jacob has 12 sons. And one of those sons is named Joseph. And so Joseph is who we're going to kind of zoom in on here for a little bit. So 12 brothers, Joseph's one of them. And he is the favorite son. He's the 11th out of the 12 brothers. And he ends up being the favorite. And so here's a little background location. This is 1600 BC is when this takes place. And it happens in Canaan. Not Canton, not South Jersey, not Canton in North Georgia, but Canaan, which is modern-day Palestine, modern-day Israel. So he grew up in a place that ended up being named after his father, Israel. And so that's the location where all this stuff takes place. And when Joseph is younger, he's 17, he begins to have these dreams. God gives him a vision, several visions, that he's going to be a leader one day, a leader of leaders. And so he gets this vision, and he goes and shares that vision or those visions with his brothers. And his brothers aren't too excited about it because he's saying to his brothers, I'm going to lead over you one day. God has given me these dreams, these visions, that I will be a leader, and I'll actually lead over you, and you'll be bowing to me. And so this almost youngest of 12, the other brothers decide, man, we hate you. But why are you telling us this stuff? You're going to actually try to rule over us one day? Forget about it. And so they decide that they want to get rid of him. And so in their frustration, their anger, their jealousy, the brothers decide to get rid of him. So they put him in this huge hole in the ground. And so we have water towers today. They had water pits. And so they would dig a huge pit called a cistern, and that would fill with rainwater, and that was their storage for all the water for a community. So they throw him into an empty cistern, this massive hole in the ground, and they leave him there for a little bit while they decide, are we going to kill him, or are we just going to get rid of him? So some of the brothers actually want to kill him, and a couple of the older brothers say, no, let's don't do that. Let's just get him out of here. And so there's a group of slave traders that are coming through town, and they decide, let's just sell him as a slave and get him out of here. The slave traders were heading to Egypt, heading to North Africa. And so that's what they did. They sold him as a slave, and he's gone. Joseph disappears. And the brothers go and tell their dad that he was killed by a wild animal and lie to him. So now Joseph has just been rejected by his own family, literally sold into slavery, taken off to Egypt, to another land, and forgotten about. And so how would you feel? mean, how does he feel? He's been absolutely rejected by the people closest to him. And now he's gone. And so he's got some choices to deal with in his soul. And here's the big choice. First one he's got is this: bitter or better. He's got a choice to either be bitter and just decide, I'm going to live in this anger and this hate towards my family, my brothers, or he can choose better. So he's got the choice, bitter or better. Hate his family, swim in that bitterness, or get better and trust God. And trust God for a better future. Be hopeful in the midst of his pain. So as I talk about trusting God, why should we trust in God? Well, the alternative is we trust in ourselves or we trust in somebody else. But here's the deal with that. You're not big enough, strong enough, smart enough, good enough to take care of all your own problems. You're not all those things. You're not good enough, big enough, strong enough to fix everything in the world. And so you're going to end up living bitter and angry as you try to grasp for control, but yet you can never really get control. And so you'll end up living in bitterness. So trusting God is the better alternative. The better way is to trust in God's sovereignty. All right, big word, sovereign. So what does this word sovereign mean? It means to reign. So the last part there, reign over all, to be in complete charge. So God is sovereign means that he's in charge of everything and everyone. And so trusting in his sovereignty, that he's really in control, is the better way to do this thing. Now, it doesn't mean that we'll have all the answers that we want, especially in the midst of pain, suffering, injustice, and all that. But what it does mean is that we're trusting him, that he has a purpose and a plan to deal with all this stuff. And so trusting in him is not necessarily getting those questions answered, but it's choosing to trust in him and what he's doing. So trusting in God, trusting in Jesus as the ultimate authority is the best response for us to suffering and injustice. So diving back into Joseph's story. So for the next 2 chapters in Genesis 39 and 40, we get 13 years of his life. So he's just been sold into slavery, and he ends up as property for a guy named Potiphar. Now, Potiphar was the head of the secret service for all of Egypt. And so he's Pharaoh's secret service head guy. That's who he ends up being a slave for. And so he's sold into slavery in this foreign land. He's property for this guy. But here's an awesome truth. Genesis 39:2. This is what it says about Joseph. So he's sold, rejected by his family. But check this out. Chapter 39, verse 2. The Lord was with Joseph, and he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. So, simple sentence, but massive truth. God was with him. So he was not alone as he went on this journey towards slavery into Egypt. God was with him on this journey. And it says that God prospered him. So even though he's living as a slave, God prospers him. He ends up being in charge of all of Potiphar's stuff. Potiphar realizes this kid has integrity. He's a leader. I'm going to put him in charge of all of my stuff, all my property. So while I'm gone working and doing my job with Pharaoh in Egypt, I'm leaving Joseph in charge. So Joseph begins to prosper even as he's living in slavery. All right, next thing is that Potiphar's wife notices Joseph. In the story in Genesis, it says that he was a good-looking dude. And so Potiphar's wife thinks that Joseph looks nice. She decides she wants a slice, but he doesn't think twice, and he gets the heck out of there. And so she wants to get with him, but he's a man of integrity, so he could be bitter. Again, if he chose bitterness, he could have said, hey, God has kind of left me. What's the deal? I've gotten sold into slavery. My boss's wife likes me, wants to get with me. Why not? I mean, hey, why not? I'm in slavery. But he doesn't choose that. He chooses the better option of integrity and gets out of there. She holds on to his cloak that day as she's trying to talk to him. His jacket, basically. He runs out of there, leaves it behind. So she takes the jacket, shows her husband when he gets home, and says, your slave tried to rape me today. And so Joseph is now unjustly accused of rape and thrown in prison. So he goes from being a slave to now he's in prison. So his trials continue. But check out again, chapter 39, a few verses later. As he ends up in prison, here's the phrase that pops up again. The Lord was with him and showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. And so now again, Joseph is not alone as he heads to prison. The Lord was with him. So he's winning while he's in prison. He's making a difference. And it says he becomes the warden. So just like Potiphar made him in charge of all of his stuff, the prison warden sees this leadership ability within Joseph. a man of integrity, even as a prisoner, and says, I want you to help me run the prison. I want you to help me be in charge of other prisoners while he's in prison. And so God continues to help Joseph prosper. And Joseph didn't quit, and he didn't forget. He didn't quit, he didn't forget. He didn't quit walking with God, trusting him, and he didn't forget who he was and who God was and what God's plan was for him. He had this dream back at 17, these visions that God had given him. You're going to be a leader one day. And already in prison, he's starting to become a leader. So again, he had that choice. Am I going to be bitter or am I going to be better? Which am I going to do? He remained humble. He was teachable, respectable, leadable, trustworthy. And he's in prison for the next 10 years, 10 plus years. And so while he's in prison, he gets his degree in Leadership 303. So God takes him to prison to teach him more about leadership. And so usually when we think about God raising us up as leaders and maturing us, we think of these great opportunities to lead in awesome situations. But instead, and often for us, God takes us through these valleys to teach us stuff. And that's what happens in Joseph's life. He ends up in prison. He ends up as a slave. And that's how God is teaching him how to be a leader, preparing him for future, even greater leadership down the road. So he's getting this leadership class from God while he's in prison. And then one day, something significant happens. When the timing is right, God brings 2 of Pharaoh's men to prison. They're actually arrested and put in prison for a short time. Joseph's in charge of the prisoners. These are 2 of the prisoners under his care. And they have some bad dreams one night, both of them, about Pharaoh, about the kingdom of Egypt. And they're disturbed, and Joseph can see their disturbance and says, hey, what's up? We've had these dreams. He said, hey, God can interpret dreams. Tell me what it is. So they tell him, he interprets the dreams for them. And they go, man, this is amazing. They get released later. They're gone. 2 years later, after they had forgotten about Joseph, they remember. And 2 years later, Pharaoh gets word. There's this guy, Joseph, that we met while we were in prison. And he can interpret dreams because Pharaoh now is having these disturbing dreams about his kingdom fading. And he doesn't know what it means. And so he says, go get this Joseph guy out of prison, bring him to me, I want to talk to him. And so his path is beginning to change. So he's released from prison and stands before Pharaoh now. So check this out for a second. He's released from prison. He had this choice all along to be bitter or better. And he had this choice to release the people who've wronged him, his family, Potiphar's wife who unjustly accused him, even these guys that he had talked to that forgot about him for a couple of years. He's chosen to release them instead of choosing revenge, of saying, you know what, I want to really get these people back. I want to hurt them. And so he could have swam in the bitterness and the revenge. So even though he's released physically this day from prison, he'd been released a long time ago, internally, in his soul, because he had chosen to let go of the hate, the anger. He chose forgiveness and freedom. Even while he's in prison, while he's a slave, he was experiencing the release, the freedom, the forgiveness that comes with making that choice to be better and trust God. So he's physically released from prison. And he didn't bring the bitterness, hate, and revenge with him. He'd wrestled through that. He chose the release. And now Pharaoh sees something in him. He sees this leadership ability. As he translates this dream for Pharaoh, Pharaoh makes him governor of all of Egypt. Because the dream had been about there's going to be 7 years of famine in the land of Egypt. And Joseph had a plan that he shared with Pharaoh about how to deal with that. And so Pharaoh said, there's nobody else as wise as this guy in the land of Egypt. I need a great leader to help run this plan. Joseph, you're my man. And so Joseph literally becomes the governor of Egypt. So rewind again. God has taken him into slavery, rejection from his brothers. Through that slavery, ends up in Egypt, ends up in prison, and now ends up as the governor of all of Egypt, the number 2 guy to Pharaoh, his right-hand man. Crazy. But this was God's plan all along. He gave Joseph that dream, and now is beginning to see the reality of it. So he's 30 years old at this point, 13 years after the original dreams and visions at 17. So God has developed the leadership skills in Joseph, the character skills in Joseph. God has given him this mind and vision for planning ahead. And now that all comes into play as he's the governor and begins to rescue this country as they get ready for famine. And so he literally saves nations and generations from starvation. And so after 7 years he spent 7 years storing up grain, knowing that there's going to be this famine one day that God is giving him a vision about. And sure enough, it happened. So after 7 years of storing all this grain, famine begins to happen. And now people are dying, crops are dying, animals are dying, and all the surrounding nations in this desert area of the world are going, man, we don't have any food. We can't grow anything because of this famine. And so they all begin to show up in Egypt because they hear Egypt has been storing grain. They've got food. They can rescue you. And so one day, now he's 37 years old, 20 years after the original dream. Guess who shows up? His brothers, his family, comes from Israel, comes from Canaan. They show up in Egypt. And they say, hey, we've heard that there's grain available. Where can we get some? And they say, go see the governor. They go to the governor, who's Joseph, but they don't recognize him. It's been 20 years, and they thought he's dead and gone. We'll never see him again. Joseph recognizes his brothers in that moment, but they don't recognize him. So again, here's the opportunity before him. Revenge or release. Revenge or release. So here's the moment. He could have sought revenge, right? He literally has them in his hand. They need him for survival. They'll die without that grain. And he holds the keys to all this grain that's been stored. But he had already chosen to release them, forgive them, and put them in God's hands and let God deal with them and what they had done to him. He released them instead of revenge and chooses, he reveals himself to them. Says, hey guys, it's me, Joseph, the one that you got rid of 20 years ago, 27 years ago. It's me. I'm here. So he's reconciled and brought back together with his brothers again. They're reunited as a family. So he'd been making these choices all along. The choice not to take revenge, but to release. The choice to choose better over bitter. And we'll have those choices all throughout our life. You and I will walk through stuff. Maybe it won't be like Joseph. Maybe it won't be the same types of trials like him. Sold into slavery, put in prison unjustly, all these different things, forgotten. But we all do walk through trials in life. So are there people that you need to forgive? Are there people that have wronged you in life in whatever way? Maybe it's family. Maybe it's teammates, coach. Maybe it's a stranger. But is there somebody or a group of people that you need to forgive? That instead of holding on to the hope for revenge, you need to release and let go of that and let God take care of them. Are you choosing bitterness instead of betterness? Bitterness is just going to make you swim in this anger and hate your whole life. And it turns into this self-made prison. Bitterness and seeking revenge turn into a self-made prison. We're the ones that become the prisoners. We think that we're going to put the other person in prison, seeking this revenge on them, but it ends up being us that lives in this self-made prison of bitterness and hate. And we miss out. It consumes us, it ruins us, and it sidetracks us from God's purpose in our life. So it's a choice. It's a choice to choose to forgive, to choose to release, to choose to not be bitter. If you're waiting until you feel like it, you just probably won't ever do that. You'll probably never really feel like forgiving somebody. So we can't avoid pain and suffering in life. Our pathways towards better are going to be littered with opportunities to be bitter. So we're going to have to make that choice. Am I going to be bitter? Because I lose my sport, I lose a relationship, loss of finances, I lose a loved one, I'm misunderstood, or I'm unjustly treated, or unfairly judged, or forgotten, or an injury, or an unexpected setback. Whatever it is, the choice is there, bitter or better. Trust God or try to trust yourself. Revenge or release. So choose to trust in God in the midst of the pain we have in life. That's what we need to do. God is the only one who can take suffering and turn it into flourishing for us. That's what he loves to do. Take the suffering of our lives and make something beautiful out of it. So bitter or better, revenge or release. It's your choice. All right, let's pray for a second as we wrap up. Father, thanks that you are in charge. You are the sovereign one who reigns over everything. Lord, would you remind us of that often? We need that daily, minute by minute, that reminder that you're in charge. As pain and injustice hit us, as we're treated unfairly, unjustly accused, forgotten, all the different things that happen to us. Lord, we need to trust in you. We want to trust in you, and we admit that it's hard to trust in you. when it feels like the pieces are falling apart. But Lord, remind us that you are faithful, you love us, and we can trust you. And thank you for Joseph's life and what you did and the example we get to see of how you gave him a vision and you brought that vision to fruition after prison, after these valleys that he went through, as he faithfully trusted in you. Help us to do the same, to trust you day in and day out for your glory and your purpose. In Jesus' name, amen.